we'll get started. So this morning here in Perth in Western Australia, I'm joined fortunately by Stan, who's going to help me finalising the review today of the book we've been looking at, Daring Greatly by Brené Brown, one of my favourite authors, and the subtitle, How the Courage to be Vulnerable Transforms the Way We Live, Love, Parent and Lead. So very quick summary, because we have been covering it and there are previous recordings available of all the chapters. Starting off with the title, where does the title Daring Greatly come from? It's from the speech by Teddy Roosevelt, known as the Man in the Arena speech, and where he concludes that really life is not a spectator sport. Life is I'm paraphrasing now, that life is about turning up and being in the arena and having a go at things, doing things, trying new stuff, not being afraid to have a go at things and risking failing, and that in the end then you'll know the triumph of achieving. But if you don't achieve, well, at least you had a go, at least you dared greatly. So that's where the daring greatly comes from. And she opens by talking about her adventures in the arena, and I love the way that Brené's always so open about her conversations with her family members, particularly with her husband Steve, and with her what do you call it, psychologist, I suppose, as well, her therapist. And she's been on quite a journey. You know, she released a video that went viral, where she was talking about her research topics, which are shame and vulnerability. Not easygoing topics for a lot of people, topics that people don't really want to talk about too much. They want to hide that stuff away. And there's the irony in it that it's only by talking about these things that you in talking about them, you're risking being vulnerable and possibly exposing yourself to shame. And yet that's the way that you deal with things and move forwards. So chapter 1 was about scarcity and the culture that we have as a backdrop to all of this, of feeling that we're never enough, that nothing is ever enough. We wake up in the morning going, I didn't get enough sleep. I did it myself this morning. and you wake up thinking, oh, I'm not good enough, or I haven't got enough resources to do what I want to do. I don't have enough money, I don't have enough time, all those sorts of things. And our media fuels that kind of feeling within us that we're not good enough, and particularly with consumerism, if we don't have the right toys, the right house, the right car, we're not as good as our neighbors or whatever. And so that self-doubt is the sort of the backdrop there to the way we look at things in the world. Chapter 2 was about debunking the vulnerability myths. The main thing there really being that in order to achieve anything in life, even just meeting a new person, we have to be vulnerable. We have to risk being exposed for who we actually are, or risk judgment by somebody else. And that really vulnerability is kind of unavoidable. It's part of life's journey anyway. And then chapter 3 was about understanding and combating shame, and where shame comes from. And a lot of that is in our earlier formative years, through comments from our parents who don't necessarily mean to upset us or offend us or scar us, but yet we can carry those sort of some of those criticisms through life, and reflect on them as being a proof that we're not good enough. And might not be our parents, might be our teachers, might be fellow students, could be anyone we encounter along the way, could be ex-lovers. Chapter 4, the vulnerability armory, is all about how we protect ourselves from all of this, and how we put our armor on, in terms of we have this shield around us that we don't want to risk being vulnerable. We don't want to let people hurt us, and so we put up barriers, you know, and we become defensive, and we sort of fight against the risk of being vulnerable and being hurt again. Chapter 5 was Mind the Gap, cultivating change and closing the disengagement divide. So how do we go about changing this backdrop of I'm not good enough? And how do we tackle the fact that in a lot of cases we disengage because that's a way of protecting ourselves? That's part of the vulnerability armory. We don't, if we don't engage fully, then we don't risk being vulnerable. But really, in order to grow, we need to be willing to fail. In order to love, we need to risk rejection, and so on. So there's the great irony of life. The thing we try to protect ourselves from is the thing that actually enhances our life or makes us grow. Chapter 6 was disruptive engagement, daring to rehumanize education and work, and the importance of us reconnecting with people. We all need people. We need social relationships. We realize that in order to achieve great things, we need to collaborate with others. Nobody who's really successful that you can hold up as being a superstar or a top athlete or a top sports star or a top musician, none of them did it on their own. They all had people who helped them along the way. And so that's a great realization that we can't do it alone. We do need other people. And therefore, we have to risk being vulnerable because we have to include other people who may reject us or harm us along the way. Stan, have I missed anything? Anything you want to add to that?
No, I think that's a pretty good summary.
All right. Thank you. Okay. Well, I thought it was, since this is the closing video today of covering this book, it was important to have a very quick summary, and that is a really quick summary. So I apologize, Brené, if I've shortcut a lot of your words there, but I'm just trying to give the sort of the sense of what the main messages are. I found chapter 7 a very interesting chapter. So it's wholehearted parenting, daring to be the adults we want our children to be. Stan, you said that you've listened to the book on audio some time ago.
Yeah, it's probably right back at the beginning. And I can't remember it now because I've listened to a bunch of other books and stuff now.
This is the challenge, isn't it? That things can sort of fade away or they blur into, which book did I read that in?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's go through it. So the question isn't so much, are you parenting the right way, as it is, are you the adult that you want your child to grow up to be? Now, that's an interesting, challenging question, isn't it? And it's perhaps confrontational. We are exposed as parents to the sense of, or the feelings of guilt, perhaps, or feelings of we're not enough as parents, that we always feel like we could have done more, we should have done more, we didn't give them enough time, we weren't there enough for them, or we didn't give them the things that they needed as as perhaps we might have. And yet there's no actual manual for being a parent, is there? There's no categoric sort of parenting 101 book that answers all the questions and teaches you how to be the perfect parent. And in this, Brené puts it as most of us would love a color-coded parenting handbook that answers all of our unanswerable questions, comes with guarantees, and minimizes our vulnerability. But we know there is no such book. The uncertainty of parenting can bring up feelings in us that range from frustration to terror. You felt terror as a parent, Stan?
Yeah, I don't know. I can't say I've felt terror. Frustration, definitely.
Definitely frustration. We all feel that. I think with terror, what she's referring to is that feeling of being hit with, what if I'm not a good enough parent? What if I've let them down? What if I haven't given them the best start in life that I possibly could? So there's no perfection, though. There's no absolute. None of us can claim to be perfect. but we want to feel like we're as good a parent as we possibly can. And therefore, one of the things we do is compare ourselves with other parents and put them down, criticize them the way that they parent, because it makes us feel more reassured that our way of parenting is the right way. So she says, ironically, parenting is a shame and judgment minefield precisely because most of us are wading through uncertainty and self-doubt when it comes to parenting. Interesting. So somewhere buried deep inside our hopes and fears for our children is the terrifying truth that there is no such thing as perfect parenting, and there are no guarantees. So even if you were, let's say in inverted commas, the perfect parent, if you thought you possibly could have achieved that thing, whatever it is, you can't guarantee the way your kids are going to turn out, because there's so many other influences. There's school, and there's other kids that they mix with, and there's the society in general and all its risks and all its influences. Advertising, the media, the news channels, all these things all impact on the way they see the world and the way that they're going to grow up. So what is our role? Well, she says she's not a parenting expert, just to be clear on that. In fact, she doesn't think there is such a thing as a parenting expert. But she says, I'm an engaged, imperfect parent and a passionate researcher, which is not a bad thing to be, is it? At least if you're engaged, as in you're interested in your children, you want to do the best you can, you can't really ask for much more than that, and to be engaged. So she's a stumbling traveler. She says, like many of you, parenting is by far my boldest and most daring adventure. The interesting thing I think about parenting is that very often when your children are teaching you, because as you're trying to teach them, they say if you want to learn something, try and teach it. And if you want to learn how to live the best life possible, try and teach little people how they should be living the best life. And then you go, hang on, am I doing that? am I actually living it? So this is what she calls wholehearted parenting. Well, I have no doubt when it comes to our sense of love, belonging, and worthiness, we're most radically shaped by our families of origin, what we hear, what we're told, and perhaps most importantly, how we observe our parents engaging with the world. So as parents, we may have less control than we think over temperament and personality, and less control than we want over the scarcity culture. But we do have powerful parenting opportunities in other areas. How we help our children understand, leverage, and appreciate their hard wiring, and how we teach them resilience in the face of relentless, never enough cultural messages. So there's a quote here from Joseph Chilton Pearce. What we are teaches the child more than what we say, so we must be what we want our children to become. It's a very interesting point, isn't it? That children are great observers. They suck in all this information. They're like sponges. And so they're watching us, listening to us, observing us all the time. And there's the scary part, because no matter how much we want to be perfect, we're not. We're human beings. We make mistakes. We get things wrong. We shout at each other. We get angry. We let ourselves down a lot of the time. And our children are watching us do that, just as we watched our parents. And we're not necessarily doing it on a conscious level. We're just sucking in all this information on a subconscious level. We're observing. And like it or not, that's influencing those children. That's the reality of life, is that they will suck in everything into that sponge, everything you do, everything you say, everything you are, and then that will help shape their values. She says vulnerability, that vulnerability of realizing that you are the role model for your children. Vulnerability lies at the center of the family story. It defines our moments of greatest joy, fear, sorrow, shame, disappointment, love, belonging, gratitude, excuse me, creativity, and everyday wonder. So whether we're holding our children or standing beside them or chasing them down or talking through their locked door, vulnerability is what shapes who we are and who our children are. So by pushing away vulnerability, we turn parenting into a competition that's about knowing, proving, executing, and measuring rather than being. If we put aside the questions of who's better and put down the yardsticks of school admissions, grades, sports, trophies, and accomplishments, I think the majority of us will agree that what we want for our children is what we want for ourselves. We want to raise children who live and love with their whole hearts. So wholehearted parenting hopefully raises wholehearted children.
We hope so.
What are your thoughts on that one, Stan?
Yeah, I remember doing Landmark Forum. We were doing the kids class, and the whole message was for parents was, "I love you and I want your life to work." And I'm like, I reckon that'd be one of them really cool things to put in as one of those books you pick up at the airport, and they only have like 25 pages, and it just says the same thing on every page, like, "I love you and I want your life to work."
Very good. Well, it's certainly an affirmation that we could all do with reminding ourselves of, isn't it? He goes on to say, if wholeheartedness is the goal, then above all else, we should strive to raise children who, and I think it's worth reading these bullet points, children who engage with the world from a place of worthiness, so they feel their own self-worth, their own value, embrace their vulnerabilities and imperfections. So in other words, accept who we are, warts and all. We're none of us are perfect. Feel a deep sense of love and compassion for themselves and others. It's certainly admirable traits, isn't it, to be a compassionate person and to love other people and to love yourself first. Children who value hard work, perseverance, and respect. Those are all good traits that we want them to have. Children who carry a sense of authenticity and belonging with them rather than searching for it in external places. That's a powerful one. How many times, I've mentioned this throughout this book a few times, the Jerry Maguire movie, and the quote in there, she completes me. We're looking for that person to complete us. No, the point is we need to complete ourselves. And so rather than looking for somebody else to do the job, we're all working on ourselves and need to be working on ourselves, because we are all on a journey and we're all a work in progress. Children who have the courage to be imperfect, vulnerable, and creative. It's a great point that she raised in one of the earlier chapters, is that creativity and innovation and words like that, where we're trying to improve ourselves and the world, or the way we do things, or systems, or business practices, everything in life requires an element of creativity. That's how humankind advances, isn't it? Somebody has to come up with a new idea, a new concept. Well, they won't do that if they fear failure, if they fear being judged. They need to go past that in order to go, well, this, and as Seth Godin says, that live with the tension of this might work, this might not work. We have to be willing to risk failure in order to succeed. Children who don't fear feeling ashamed or unlovable if they're different or if they're struggling. Well, that's a very good point too, because that so often children might feel like they don't fit in, and we'll come to fitting in a minute. Children who move through our rapidly changing world with courage and a resilient spirit. That's what we want, isn't it? We want to inspire our children and arm them with courage and a resilient spirit, so that nothing can knock them down, that they can override any problems. So what does that mean for us? Well, for parents, This means we are called upon to, and here's another series of bullet points, acknowledge that we can't give our children what we don't have, and so we must let them share in our journey to grow, change, and learn. So it's okay to admit to a child as a parent, I'm sorry, I made a mistake there. I was mean to you earlier, or I shouldn't have said that to you, or Daddy was angry in that moment, and that they get it too. They get that we're not perfect, and very often our children are smarter than we might give them credit for. They can come up with some really amazing, insightful things sometimes. For parents, it means we're called upon to recognize our own armor and model for our children how to take it off, how to be vulnerable, show up, and let ourselves be seen and known. So even just in being brave ourselves, we're setting an example. We're showing them how it's done. As parents, we're called upon to honor our children by continuing on our own journeys towards wholeheartedness. Just the very fact that we're not perfect teaches them that it's okay for them not to be perfect too. We're called upon to parent from a place of enough rather than scarcity. We're called upon to mind the gap and practice the values we want to teach. And we're called upon to dare greatly, possibly more than we've ever dared before. I think that is one of the realizations you have as you become a parent, where you first of all realize how much your own parents did and had to go through to raise you, how much they did for you, how much they actually loved you, how much they've sacrificed for you. And you realize that that's now your job to do those things for your children. And it's quite a wake-up call, isn't it, Stan? As one who's going through that again now, I'm a grandparent, but Stan's right in the arena at the moment.
Yes.
Anything to add to that?
Can you hand them back sometimes?
We all have that question in our heads at times. So, in other words, if we want our children to love and accept who they are, our job is to love and accept who we are. We can't use fear, shame, blame, and judgment in our own lives if we want to raise courageous children. Compassion and connection, the very things that give purpose and meaning to our lives, can only be learned if they are experienced. And our families are our first opportunities to experience these things. Powerful stuff, isn't it? So where do we understand and combat shame by realizing that shame is probably well, there are prerequisites for how we're going to combat that. And again, there's some bullet points here. She says, we all have a list that says, I'll be worthy when I lose this weight, or when I get accepted into this school, or if my wife's not cheating, or if we don't get divorced, if I get promoted, when I get pregnant, when he asks me out, when we buy a house in this neighborhood, and if no one finds out. So shame loves prerequisites. It's when we've got all these gremlins in our mind that we have to achieve in order to be worthy of love, of, well, just worthy human beings. And prerequisites and perfectionism are handed down in very subtle ways. And so she talks about a lady called Miss Morrison, who was interviewed on the Oprah show. And she said, I love this story actually. She says, a beautiful thing about the messages we get who we are when a child first walks into the room. She says, it's interesting to watch what happens when a child walks into a room. She asked, does your face light up? She explained, when my children used to walk in the room when they were little, I looked at them to see if they had buckled their trousers, or if their hair was combed, or if their socks were up. You think your affection and your deep love is on display because you're caring for them. But it's not. When they see you, they see the critical face. What's wrong now? Her advice was simple, but paradigm shifting for me. She said, let your face speak what's in your heart. When they walk in the room, my face says, I'm glad to see them. It's just as small as that, you see. Great advice, isn't it? Because as parents, we're trying to constantly correct them. We're constantly trying to make them better by picking up on all these little things, when what they really want and need is your approval, your love, that they are enough, no matter what, no matter whether their hair's a mess or they haven't brushed their teeth or all these other things that we as parents try and make them do and try and make them live up to a standard. So she says this means we need to separate our children from their behaviors. As it turns out, there's a significant difference between you are bad and you did something bad. And we've got Coralie just joining us. I'll just let her into the room here as well.
Yay, Carly!
Hi.
Hey, Coralie. Well, you've got a bright, colourful shirt on today.
Yes.
Very
That's a treat.
nice. Very nice. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Just thought I'd pop on and say Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. Merry Easter.
We're nearly at that point, aren't we? So we're just talking about parenting, Coralie, chapter 7 of Daring Greatly. And this is a very significant moment that you've just turned up at, actually.
Yeah.
The conclusion here is we need to separate our children from their behaviors. So there's a big difference, it says, Brené says here, between you are bad and you did something bad. So if a child tells a lie, she can change that behavior. If she is a liar, where's the potential for changing that? So when we have to be very careful about labels, don't we? When we give them labels, we can scar them subconsciously because they carry that label with them their whole life then. If it's a traumatic moment, if something bad's happened and they've behaved badly, and we go, oh, you're an idiot or something like that. Well, no, they're just a good person who's made a bad choice.
Mm.
Your thoughts on that one?
Oh, we're doing the opposite of labels because, I said a while ago about my kid being trans. Well, we're in between at the moment. So
Right.
we're not a boy or a girl, so we don't even have a name.
We don't even have a name.
It's a confusing world these days, isn't it?
Yeah, so we don't do labels.
With pronouns and all that sort of thing that are coming in now, and
Yeah.
what you identify as.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting time, isn't it? You imagine these discussions 10 years ago, but 100 years ago, further back, what do you mean you're not a bloke? Or what do you mean you're not a girl? Or, it definitely is an interesting time.
Yes.
So the key thing in the book here that Brené's talking about as a wholehearted parent is for them to realize, and for you to try to impart to them, that no matter what they do, no matter what they say, no matter how they behave, your love is unconditional. Your love for them is still there. And if they get something wrong, you might criticize their behavior and try to show them as parents how we would like them to behave to fit into society or to be the best version of themselves that they can be. But we don't want to give them the impression that therefore they're unlovable because they've done a bad thing or they've not performed the way society expects them to in some way. If you haven't done your homework, if you haven't tidied your room, it's you've done a bad thing, but it doesn't make you a bad person. So shame is so painful for children because it is inextricably linked to the fear of being unlovable. So that fear that if I'm not good enough, no one will love me, or my parents don't even love me. I don't belong. And feeling unlovable is a threat to survival. So it actually eats away at our core survival instinct. If we don't belong in the cave with the rest of the family we're out there with all the monsters outside the cave. Yeah, it's so deeply embedded into those parts of our brain that we don't have as much control over as we'd like to. So that childhood experiences of shame change who we are, how we think about ourselves, and our sense of self-worth. I highlighted that bit in orange, by the way. That just shows you how powerful that statement is. I'll reread that. So I'll read you the whole sentence. I suspect we'll eventually have the data to support my hypothesis about children storing shame as trauma. But in the meantime, I can say without hesitation that childhood experiences of shame change who we are, how we think about ourselves, and our sense of self-worth. So when you are shamed, when you are put down, when you are slagged off or told you're not good enough in some area, it can influence how you see yourself and how you fit in the world, your sense of self-worth. It's a scary thing as a parent that one misplaced sentence could live with a child for the rest of their life.
Yeah, and
you
might not have meant it in a sort of shamey way, and it came across like that, and you've just ruined your kid's life.
That's not funny, Carly.
I'm doing a laugh cry thing.
Yeah, I know. It's a huge responsibility, isn't it? But then you think back and you think, okay, well, what did my parents do for me, or what did they do to me? You know, in what areas can you think of something that your parents said to you that maybe made you feel bad about yourself, or feel that you're not good enough or not worthy of being loved? And really, that's actually our responsibility to then process that. And maybe what helps us process it is the act of then becoming a parent ourselves, because then we can review with the benefit of hindsight and the benefit of now being the parent and realizing that we're now the role model. We realize how tough it was for our parents. I remember that question. My father, I was in a swimming pool one day around at their house, and I always remember it clearly. My father saying to me, "Do you think we did a good job as parents?" A very interesting question. And fortunately, I was now a parent myself, so I was able to. And I had a 4 or 5 year old or whatever at the time, and I said, "Look, Dad, there's no manual on how to be a parent, really." And I said, "I'm a parent now myself, and you realize that none of us are perfect, but you did the best you could with what you knew and what you had available to you at the time." And that's all anyone can ask of anybody. So I hope that answered the question for him. But it's a confrontational question, isn't it? Because I had a divorce, and I ended up being a part-time parent where I would have them every other weekend, and in between I would go and see them as well, maybe take them out for dinner on the week that I didn't have them. And one thing I always did is go and drive to see my son play basketball on the week I didn't have him, on the Saturday that it wasn't my weekend, but I go and watch him play. And the same with my daughter when she was playing t-ball and so on. So at least with their sports. But that's because it stuck with me as a child that my parents were too busy and they didn't come and watch me playing sports and things, because they were working most of the time. So it wasn't their fault. They probably would have liked to have been there and seen it. But I remember thinking, well, there's these other kids here have got their parents on the touchline yelling for them, and my dad only ever came to watch me play football, I think, twice. And ironically, the second time he came was when I was an adult playing over here, and I scored a goal, and he turned away and missed it just to the point that I scored the goal. So, but that's just reality of life, isn't it? Sometimes people have good intentions, and yet they can't fulfill it. So as young adults, we're often very judgmental of our parents and how they ruined our lives and, said the wrong things to us and treated us. But then we get the real slap in the face is when we become the parents ourselves And we suddenly realize that, hey, we're not perfect either. And we're trying to be role models and set examples. But that's the thing that Brené's focusing on here in this book, is there is no way out of that. We have to be vulnerable in order to do the best we can, but then we risk being judged and being the ones who then our children will be saying to us in 20 years' time, well, you always told me this and you made me feel like I wasn't good enough. Or, you know, that's the scariest part, isn't it? That fear of actually your children judging you as a parent. Well, what's the alternative? Don't be a parent?
Yeah. It's a risky business.
Then you miss out on all the joys that come with that too, don't you? So there's no way out of it, really. You either miss out through not getting involved, not being in the arena, or you risk the fact that, you know, you might be less than perfect. Interesting, hey?
Yeah.
We can't. Sorry, go on.
I think we all traumatize our children. It's just sort of, yeah, we do it.
We do, don't we? In one way or another, because there are those moments when you're at your end of your tether. You know, you've had a bad day at work. You've just had a row with your partner. Things are not going well, and that's the moment when the child really plays up and does something really stupid or annoying, and you react. But you're reacting to all the other stuff that's going on. And then if you were asked about that the next day, you know, how do you feel about how you reacted in that moment? In the calmness of reflection, you would say, oh, I wasn't my best there, was I? You know, but that's life. That we're all human. We're all subject to all these different pressures and stresses. Knowing nods from two parents there.
Well, I've also seen people who had, you know, hippie parents that were all calm all the time and everything, so that they feel like they didn't experience real life, or they're sort of traumatized in some other way. And you're like, so you had the perfect parents, but you still have issues.
Well, that's the point in this chapter, is there is no such thing as a perfect parent.
No.
And all there is different parenting styles. Yeah, there's different parenting styles. And so a point that Brené's making in this chapter is that very often we'll criticize other parents because it makes us feel better about who we are as parents. We can go, oh, I don't like the way that they're doing that. That's not good parenting. So therefore I must be doing things my way is the right way. And yet we still end up with traumatized children, as you said. So whether you're the hippie parent or the authoritarian parent or whatever, there's benefits and downsides to both styles. But ultimately we have to trust that they'll turn out okay. So her point here is that the biggest thing that children pick up is not what you say, but how you are, who you are, how you behave. They'll notice everything: how you behave under pressure, how you behave in an argument, how you behave when things are not going well for you in life. They pick up all of that. And you can say what you like till you're blue in the face, but they'll observe who you are and how you behave. That's the confronting thing, isn't it, really? We can't shame-proof our children, she says. Our task instead is teaching and modeling shame resilience. And that starts with conversations about what shame is and how it shows up in our lives. So using shame as a parenting tool, well, what do you think you're doing? You're not good enough. You know, go and change those socks, or, you know, tidy up your room. You want to live in a pigsty the rest of your life? You know, that kind of, we all come out with these comments. Normalizing is one of the most powerful shame resilience tools we can offer our children. Normalizing means helping our children know that they're not alone and that we've experienced many of the same struggles. This applies to social situations, changes in their bodies, shaming experiences, feeling left out and wanting to be brave but feeling afraid. There's something sacred that happens between a parent and a child when the parent says "me too" or shares a personal story that relates to their child's struggle. So I don't know if you ever had that gender identity, Coralie. Yes, I went through that too.
Because it wasn't offered in the same way, you know. It wasn't sort of like a, yeah. Like because we had the homosexual law reform when I was a teenager. And before that, I knew nothing about homosexuality, that it was a thing. And then it was like an option. And I'm like, oh, well, and, you know, so then you wonder about it. But to me, that's like what gender identity is like now. It's like, it didn't really used to be like it would have been for people who were strongly felt they were of a gender that they weren't born. But for a lot of other people, it's like, oh, you can choose your gender now.
Mm.
Who knew?
It's a very interesting time, isn't it? I wonder how, when, you know, how human beings are going to look back on this era in another couple of decades. To see that as, I don't know how they'll judge it, whether it's a turning point, a progressive thing, or a crazy thing. I don't know what label they'll put on it, but it's fascinating, isn't it? When you look at the way that society changes and the, you know, fashions and styles and what's acceptable behavior and what's not, and you know, the battle for equal opportunities, genderism, racism, all the things that have happened through the centuries. History then decides
Yes,
what was an acceptable period, what was acceptable behavior, what wasn't. You know, you look back on it and you go, how could they possibly treat women like that? How could they not give them the vote? And how could they? And then now maybe in another 20 years they'll be going, well, of course they had to have the right to choose their gender. And I don't know how
yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So this is another good point she makes. When we feel good about the choices we're making, and when we're engaging with the world from a place of worthiness rather than scarcity, we feel no need to judge and attack. Okay, there's a difference between, you know, if we think that another parent is abusing a child, but is that just a label that we've put on it, you know, because they're making them stand up straight? Is that abuse? No, there's a difference between that and actual, you know, physical harm or verbal abuse or emotional abuse. And she spent years as a social worker in child protective services. So there's this word like abuse, for instance, or neglect is thrown around quite often to scare or belittle parents who are simply doing things that we judge as wrong, different, or bad. But she said, I've sworn off the good bad parenting dichotomy simply because on any given day you could file me under both good parent and bad parent depending on your perspective and how things are going for me.
Yeah.
We all have bad days, and we'll have days when we think, oh, I wasn't very good there, was I? I didn't handle that very well. I shouldn't have shouted at my child, or I shouldn't have told them off there. I should have let them be more let them explore what's right and wrong. I don't know. I mean, there's always those situations when you think back and you go, oh, I didn't do that very well, did I? But then there's other things you think, God, I handled that really well, didn't I? I'm so good as a parent.
That's true, and then you can do both in the same conversation.
Definitely. Yeah. So this thing about minding the gap and belonging. Now, this is very interesting, I thought. She said in an earlier page, I define belonging as the innate human desire to be part of something larger than us. One of the biggest surprises in this research was learning that fitting in and belonging are not the same thing. In fact, fitting in is one of the greatest barriers to belonging. Fitting in is about assessing a situation and becoming who you need to be in order to be accepted. Belonging, on the other hand, doesn't require us to change who we are. It requires us to be who we are. That's pretty powerful, isn't it? I highlighted that bit in orange as well, just so you know. Don't you think that's powerful?
Yeah.
How many times, when you think back through your own life, did you change to fit in?
Heaps.
And were you being true to yourself when you did that? Shouldn't people accept you as you are, rather than you have to become one of them?
But it's not even that they didn't. It was just like that reminds me of starting smoking. You know, it's like you want to do it to fit in. But it's not like the people who didn't start smoking weren't part of the group. They still were. They just were more sensible.
Yeah. So very often we might think we've got to behave, and this is the power of peer pressure, isn't it? And the danger of peer pressure too. Peer pressure can be a good thing if you've got a bunch of good kids who are really well behaved and doing the right thing, and your child gets involved with them. You think, well, that's great. They're good people for her to hang out with or him to hang out with, because they're going to learn the right way to do things from these kids. They're cool kids. But you could also have them running with the reprobates and thinking, oh no, what are they going to learn from this lot? You know, I remember my son, as a young man, going off and moving into a house with a bunch of mates who were all doing a lot of drugs. And I thought, oh no, here we go. And I knew he was trying things, but luckily he had the wherewithal to figure it out and come out of it and go, no, this is going to pull me down. It's not. He looked at some of his friends and he went, oh my God, look at the way they're behaving, and who they're becoming because of these drugs. And he pulled himself out of it. And I was just going, oh, thank God for that. You know, you can only hope in those situations that you've put the groundwork in, the value, and I don't take all the credit for that. Obviously, my ex-wife did a lot of good work there, but you hope that who you are and how you value things and how you behave will impact on them in a positive way. And then hopefully when they're tested, they'll come through it and make the right choices. So, but it could so easily go the other way. And is it your fault if a child succumbs to peer pressure and does get into drugs or crime or those things, you know, even though they might know what they're doing is wrong, or they're still going to maybe do it in order to fit in with who they're hanging out with? And they realize this young, though, because she said she did research with a group of 8th graders. Now, Stan, you might be able to help me on this. Do you know what 8th grade relates to and how old that would be? This is the American school system.
No, 8th grade would be about so someone just about 13.
So young teenagers. She asked them to break into small teams and come up with the differences between fitting in and belonging, and their answers floored her. Belonging is being somewhere where you want to be and they want you. Fitting in is in being somewhere where you really want to be, but they don't care one way or the other. Belonging is being accepted for you. Fitting in is being accepted for being like everyone else. I get to be me if I belong. I have to be like you to fit in. Powerful, isn't it? So we need to, in order to cultivate worthiness in our children, we need to make sure that they know that they belong and their belonging is unconditional. And this is where I think a lot of our problems in society have come from, is the breakdown of family units, you know, the number of broken marriages, divorce rates incredibly high. And broken families can easily lead to sometimes kids blaming themselves for their parents breaking up, or feeling like they don't belong, or, you know, while the parents are going through all the emotional turmoil, that the kids are feeling neglected or not as loved. So this is the biggest thing, is for us to impart the sense that they are loved unconditionally, that they are good enough to be loved, to their merit, or worthy of love. This is an interesting quote about darkness and compassion from Pema Chödrön, who writes, "Compassion is not a relationship between the healer and the wounded. It's a relationship between equals. Only when we know our own darkness well can we be present with the darkness of others. Compassion becomes real when we recognize our shared humanity." So when your child is at this point again about sharing things from your own life, you relate to the child, or you show them that you relate to them by sharing your experiences. You know, when I was your age, this happened to me, and this is how I had to deal with it. And I didn't know what to do, but I got through it. That sort of reaching out and telling those stories makes them feel that they're not alone, that they're not the only one going through it, that you understand them, that you too have been through growing up and becoming a parent, and that they will too one day. And whatever's going on, you'll survive it. You'll get through it. So she talks. Then there's a great story where her daughter's got a problem, and the daughter's saying, "Oh, I know what it's like to be the other." You know, this actually struck a chord with me. I don't know if you ever were in this experience where the teacher maybe has picked forms two teams and says, well, you know, Billy and John are the two captains, right? You pick the players for your team, and everyone else is standing over there in a group, and you're like, okay, Stan, you're with me, Coralie, you're with this person, and you end up that the kids that are the last ones to be picked, how do they feel?
That was me.
And she calls it being one of the others. Oh, the last few that are left can just be divided up between them. So you weren't named as being one of the key players. Yeah. So I think that we've probably all experienced that. You think back and you think, why do teachers do that? That's, you know, do they not realize the impact they're having on children? So this kid's come back really upset because she was one of the others, you know, the last few to get picked. And so Brené's trying to console her daughter, Ellen. And I was going, you don't know what it's like. You're popular. And she goes, oh, no, I wasn't popular.
I was
I know what it's like to feel alone, to feel hurt, you know, so she starts telling her about how she went through the same sort of stories. And so there was, she was scheduled to speak at a star-studded event and dying to see the publicity poster. And she said, it seems weird now, but I was so excited at the idea of seeing my photo next to the pictures of the movie stars. I sat down on the couch with the poster when it arrived in the mail, opened it up, and was scanning, looking for her own photograph on the picture. And then her daughter walked in, saw that her mood had changed, said, what's wrong, Mum? And she patted the couch, said, sit down next to me. I held the poster open and she traced the pictures with her finger. I don't see you. Where are you? I pointed to a line on the poster under the celebrity photos that said, and others. So all these named movie stars and others, and she was one of the others. So Ellen leaned back against the sofa cushions, put her head on my shoulder and said, oh, Mum, I think you're the others. I'm sorry. But she said it turned out to be one of the best moments of her life because it was a connection there with her daughter. And she said in that moment, we knew that we belonged where it mattered the most, which was at home with each other. So even the stars, even the celebrities have the moments of feeling like they're not worthy, not good enough. Interesting how her son taught her a lesson where she's talking about someone, and son says, you said that when we feel good about who we are, we don't say mean things about other people. Oh, oops. I heard that and I thought, well, I'm sure I said something mean about somebody yesterday. I actually said, well, that was mean, wasn't it? So, you know, we're all on a journey. So engagement is the biggest thing. Engagement with your children, being there for them, investing time and energy. That's the biggest thing you can give for them. And in doing so, you're practicing the values and you're showing them by example the values, and that's what they're absorbing. And you hope that when they're tested later on, that they're resilient because those values are in place. Their values are what gets them through the difficult situations. So what good parenting, engaged parents do is to share a philosophy of I'm not perfect and I'm not always right, but I'm here. I'm open, I'm paying attention, loving you and fully engaged. And there's no question that engagement requires sacrifice, but that's what we signed up for when we decided to become parents. So the courage to be vulnerable, well, hope. She talks about hope is a function of struggle. Hope happens when we have the ability to set realistic goals. So I know where I want to go. Hope happens when we're able to figure out how to achieve those goals, including the ability to stay flexible and develop alternative routes, which means I know how to get there. I'm persistent. I can tolerate disappointment and still keep going. And hope occurs when we believe in ourselves and we think, I can do this. So hope is a combination of setting goals, having the tenacity and perseverance to pursue them, and believing in our own abilities. Raising children who are hopeful and who have the courage to be vulnerable means stepping back and letting them experience disappointment, deal with conflict, learn how to assert themselves, and have the opportunity to fail. If we're always following our children into the arena, hushing the critics, and assuring their victory, they'll never learn that they have the ability to dare greatly on their own. So we have to be willing to let them fail sometimes, and we can't protect them from that. We have to show them how you get through the disappointments and the setbacks. And another point I've highlighted in orange here, a key point I think, is sometimes the bravest and most important thing you can do is just to show up. So there's a story there where her daughter is not a great swimmer, but the coach has asked her to swim in this swimming heat, and she doesn't want to do it because she knows she's going to come last and she's going to be embarrassed, and some of the kids are going to finish so much faster than her, they'll be standing on the podium waiting for the next event to start while she's still finishing swimming, and she doesn't want to go. And so Brené and Steve say to her, look, if the coach wants you to do it, you need to do it so that they can judge your time and set you in the right sort of group after that. And it's okay. You just do your best. That's all you can do. It doesn't matter if the other kids finish faster than you or whatever. Just do it. And the kid does it. And then as predicted, the other kids have finished the race and got out of the pool, and she's still swimming. But she does it, and she comes out finally and gets out of the pool, walked over to her coach, who gave her a hug, then showed her something about her kick and how she could improve that for improving her time next time. Came back to her parents, and she said, looked at her dad and said, that was pretty bad, but I did it. I showed up and I got wet. I was brave. So that's the biggest thing, isn't it? Is to teach our children that it's okay to do your best, to show up, to dare greatly. The title of the book. So that's she has a Wholehearted Parenting Manifesto at the end of the chapter there that you can download a copy of this manifesto. But it's all about unconditional love, pretty much, and no matter what happens, no matter what their achievements are, but what their setbacks are as well, that won't change the fact that you love them and you're there for them. We have a chapter there, a very short few words on final thoughts, and she repeats the quote, the Daring Greatly quote from Theodore Roosevelt that started all this and has spawned the title of the book. Daring greatly is not about winning or losing. It's about courage. It's about showing up. And that applies to us as parents too. Daring greatly is being a parent or being willing to be the role model and to realize that we're going to stuff it up sometimes, but just to do it anyway. What else? There was another quote I highlighted here, which is there's an explanation in the appendix here about how her theories have evolved and how she's done the research. I thought this was a great quote at the end. Practicing gratitude. It is not joy that makes us grateful. It is gratitude that makes us joyful. That was Brother David Steindl-Rast. There you go. Daring greatly. Final thoughts, anyone? You enjoyed the book?
Yeah, it was pretty good.
I found it a very powerful, inspirational book. The interesting thing is, before I came across the book and I'd written my own book, I had put that Theodore Roosevelt quote at the beginning of my book, because it was, when I heard it, it was such a powerful speech. And, you know, to be the man in the arena, or the person in the arena, to be politically correct, however you define yourself, whatever gender, pronoun, or whatever you want to call yourself, you are the person, the human being in the arena. You're daring greatly, and it doesn't matter what the critics on the outside say. You've turned up. You're there. You're giving it a go, and that's the best thing that you can do. That's all anyone can ask, is to do your best. So I was always struck by that Theodore Roosevelt quote as being a very influential and powerful quote. When we turn up and we have a go, we're daring greatly. We're risking failing. We're risking being vulnerable. We're risking criticism, judgment, but we're there. And that's how humans advance. That's how the world improves, isn't it? By us daring greatly to be creative, to be to explore, to go boldly where no man has gone before. Oh, sorry, that got changed to where no person has gone before. Star Trek quote, you know. Everything's affected nowadays, isn't it, by those changes in our society's way of looking at things. So powerful book. Any other thoughts before we close off today's meeting? You're both looking very reflective. I'm sure you'll have some other thoughts that'll occur to you as the day goes on. All right. So moving forwards, we're going from there. Thank you, Brené Brown, for a wonderful book, Daring Greatly. I found another wonderful book for us to review next time round, and that is Happy by Turia Pett. I'm not sure if it's Turia or Turaya. I have to find out the answer to that, as to how that's pronounced. But I'll say it as Turia. I'm sorry if I'm wrong. Turia was an ultra marathon runner who was running through the Australian bush in Western Australia and was burned to 65% of her body and survived it. She was helicoptered out and went to the burns unit and went through one heck of a journey after that. How do you rebuild your life after such painful, disfiguring, awful, scarring, like a traumatic experience like that? It's a very, very inspirational, powerful book. So good one to start the new year on. I think, what are we today? We are the 23rd, sorry. So being as
two more sleeps.
Next week being the 30th, there might be a lot going on for people. So my recommendation is we have a break next Friday, which will give everyone time to get the book and fit it in, if you can, around all the Christmas stuff that's going on. And we'll get together again on the Friday the 6th of January for our next session. Okay.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
And we'll start with Happy. Good way to start the new year, isn't it? Happy. All right. Thank you, guys. Thanks for coming in and being part of the journey, and for helping to review Brené's book and other books through the year. Hope you have an awesome Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. Oh.
Cheers. Bye for now.
Bye.